Hello, good morning, dear students. This is Mr. Ishitu Tasfaye, your biology teacher. Welcome to grade 11 biology week 12 lesson. The lesson for today is chapter 33, lesson 3, the respiratory system. Textbook page 963 to 969. Let's get started with the lesson objective. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify the structures of the respiratory system and describe their function, describe gas exchange, describe how breathing is controlled, and describe the effects of smoking on the respiratory system. Structures of the respiratory system. Before we look at the structures of the respiratory system, let us first consider the function of the respiratory system and how it works in collaboration with the circulatory system. What is the function of the respiratory system? The human respiratory system picks up oxygen from the air we inhale and releases carbon dioxide into the air we exhale. With each breath, air enters the body through the air passageways and fills the lungs, where gas exchange takes place. The circulatory system links the exchange of gases in the lungs with our body tissues. Structurally, the respiratory system consists of the nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, and the lungs. Now let's look at the structures of the respiratory system one after the other. The very first one is the nose. The nose, as you can see right here, is the first part of the respiratory system, which contains the two openings. We call it nostrils, and the nasal cavity, which takes air to the pharynx. To keep lung tissue healthy, air entering the respiratory system must be filtered, moistened, and warmed. Hairs lining the entrance to the nasal cavity start the filtering process by trapping large particles. Incoming air is warmed in the inner nasal cavity and the sinuses. These areas produce mucus that moisten the air and catches even more dust particles. The next three structures after the nose are pharynx, larynx, and trachea. Air moves through the nose to a cavity at the back of the mouth called the pharynx or throat, which serves as a passageway for both air and food. Air moves from the pharynx into the trachea or windpipe. When you swallow food or liquid, a flap of tissue called the epiglottis covers the entrance to the trachea, ensuring that the food or liquid goes into the esophagus. Between the pharynx and the trachea is the larynx, which contains highly elastic folds of tissue known as the vocal cords. When muscles pull the vocal cords together, the air moving between them causes the cords to vibrate and produce sound. Mucus produced in the trachea continues to trap inhaled particles. Cilia lining the trachea sweep both mucus and trapped particles away from the lungs towards the pharynx, where they can be swallowed or spit out. The next respiratory system structure after the trachea is the lung. From the trachea, air moves into two large tubes in the chest cavity called bronchi. Each bronchus leads to one lung. Within each lung, the large bronchus divides into smaller bronchi, which lead to even smaller passageways called bronchioles. Bronchi and bronchioles are surrounded by smooth muscles, controlled by the autonomic nervous system that regulate the size of air passageways. The bronchioles continue to divide until they end at a series of tiny air sacs called the alveoli. Alveoli are grouped in clusters like bunches of grapes. A network of capillaries surrounds each alveolus. Now let's see gas exchange and transport. How are oxygen and carbon dioxide exchanged and transported throughout the body? Oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged across the walls of alveoli and capillaries. Chemical properties of blood and red blood cells allow for efficient transport of gases throughout the body. Gas exchange. When air enters alveoli, oxygen dissolves in the moisture on their inner surface and then diffuses across thin capillary walls into the blood. Oxygen diffuses in this direction because the oxygen concentration is greater in the alveoli than it is in the blood. Carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into the alveoli because its concentration is greater in the blood than it is in the air in the alveoli. The air you inhale usually contains 21% oxygen and 0.04% carbon dioxide. Exhaled air usually contains less than 15% oxygen and 4% carbon dioxide. Your lungs remove about a fourth of the oxygen in the air you inhale and increase the carbon dioxide content of the air by a factor of 100. With that being said, now let's look at how transport of carbon dioxide and oxygen takes place between respiratory system, particularly alveoli, and the circulatory system, which is the blood. Fusion of oxygen from alveoli into capillaries is a passive process that stops when oxygen concentration in the blood and the alveoli is the same. Hemoglobin actively binds to dissolved oxygen, removing it from plasma and enabling diffusion from the alveoli to continue. Hemoglobin binds with so much oxygen that it increases blood's oxygen carrying capacity more than 60 times. When carbon dioxide diffuses from body tissues to capillaries, most of it enters red blood cells and combines with water, forming carbonic acid. The rest of it dissolves in plasma or binds to hemoglobin and proteins in plasma. These processes are reversed in the lungs, where carbon dioxide is released into the alveoli and then exhaled. Now let's look at how the breathing process takes place. What mechanisms are involved in breathing? Movements of the diaphragm and rib cage changes air pressure in the chest cavity during inhalation and exhalation. Inhalation. What is inhalation? Inhalation, as the name indicates, is the movement of air into the lungs. And the process is possible due to the joint action of the diaphragm and the pleural membranes. As you can see on the diagram on the right side, the lungs are sealed in two sacs called pleural membranes inside the chest cavity. At the bottom of the chest cavity is a large dome-shaped muscle known as. When you inhale, the diaphragm contracts and flattens. Muscles between the ribs also contract, raising the rib cage. These actions increase the volume of the chest cavity and create a partial vacuum inside the cavity. Atmospheric pressure fills the lungs as air rushes into the breathing passage. Exhalation. Exhalation is the movement of air out of the lungs. During exhalation, both the rib cage and the diaphragm relax, decreasing the volume of the chest cavity and making air pressure in the chest cavity greater than the atmospheric pressure. This leads to the movement of air out of the lungs. Exhalation is usually a passive process, but to blow out a candle, speak, sing, or yell, you need more force than passive exhalation provides. Then from where does that extra force comes? The extra force is provided by muscles between the ribs and abdominal muscles, which contract vigorously as the diaphragm relaxes. Now, why chest wounds are always serious? Breathing works only because the chest cavity is sealed. If a wound punctures or perforates the chest, even if it does not affect the lungs directly, air may leak into the chest cavity and make breathing almost impossible. Breathing and homeostasis. Breathing is initiated by the breathing center in the part of the brainstem called the medulla oblongata. Sensory neurons in or near the medulla oblongata and in some large blood vessels gather information about carbon dioxide levels in the body and send the information to the breathing center. Then, when this breathing center is stimulated, it sends nerve impulses that cause the diaphragm and chest muscles to contract, bringing in air into the lungs. Your nervous system therefore has a final control of your breathing muscles, whether you are conscious or not. Smoking and the respiratory system. How does smoking affect the respiratory system? Chemicals in tobacco smoke damage structures throughout the respiratory system and have other negative health effects too. What are the effects of smoking on the respiratory system? Three of the most dangerous substances in tobacco smoke are nicotine, carbon monoxide, and tar. Nicotine is an addictive stimulant that increases the heart rate and blood pressure. Carbon monoxide is a poisonous gas that blocks hemoglobin from binding with oxygen, thus interfering with oxygen transport in the blood. Tar contains at least 60 compounds, all of which are carcinogenic. Tobacco smoke paralyzes cilia in the trachea, allowing inhaled particles to stick to the walls of the respiratory tract or enter the lungs, and smoke-laden mucus to become trapped along airways. Irritation from accumulated particles and mucus triggers a cough to clear the airways. That's why smokers cough most of the time. Smoking also causes the lining of the respiratory tract to swell, which reduces airflow to the alveoli. What are the diseases caused by cigarette smoking? Damage to the respiratory system from smoking become permanent and lead to diseases such as chronic bronchitis, emphysema, and lung cancer. What is chronic bronchitis? In chronic bronchitis, the bronchi become inflamed and clogged with the mucus. Smoking even a moderate number of cigarettes on a regular basis can produce chronic bronchitis. Affected people often find simple activities like climbing stairs very difficult. Treatments can control symptoms, but there is no cure. Emphysema. Long-term smoking can lead to emphysema, the loss of elasticity and eventual breakdown of lung tissue. People with emphysema cannot get enough oxygen to the body tissues or rid the body of excess carbon dioxide. There is no cure for emphysema, but it can be treated with medication. The third and most dangerous impact of smoking is lung cancer. Lung cancer is particularly deadly because by the time it is detected, it usually has spread to other parts of the body. Few people diagnosed with lung cancer live more than 5 years. About 87% of lung cancer deaths are due to smoking. Other effects of smoking. Smoking also negatively affects the circulatory system. It raises blood pressure by constricting blood vessels, which forces the heart to work harder to deliver enough oxygen. Non-smokers exposed to second-hand smoke are also at greater risk for respiratory and circulatory system disease. Studies showed that children of smokers are twice as likely to develop asthma or other respiratory problems. Pregnant women who smoke place their babies at greater risk for many complications. Effects of second-hand smoke to non-smokers is summarized by the table below. It exposes people to cancer-causing chemicals such as formaldehyde, arsenic, and ammonia. It aggravates asthma. It increases incidence of ear infections. It causes sticky platelets and damaged blood vessels. And finally, it causes up to 70,000 deaths from heart disease each year. Now let's answer the following lesson check questions. Question number 1. Explain the function of the respiratory system. Great. The respiratory system takes in oxygen and releases carbon dioxide. Question number 2. Describe the process of gas exchange in the lungs. Well done. Oxygen diffuses from air in the alveoli to blood cells. Carbon dioxide, on the other hand, diffuses from the blood to the air in the alveoli. Question number 3. What are the 3 most dangerous substances in tobacco smoke? The 3 most dangerous substances in tobacco smoke are nicotine, carbon monoxide, and tar. Finally, how does the volume of the chest cavity change during inhalation? The correct answer is the volume of the chest cavity increases during inhalation. Thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you very soon.